Again, the dependent variables for this study are listed here, and they were attitudes toward the practicality of pedagogical shift 3, attitudes towards school support when it comes to the implementation of pedagogical shift 3, and attitude towards this shift in comparison with the previous New York State. Research question 1. Is there a relationship between teacher attitudes toward the Common Core state standards and teachers' scores on Part C? The null hypothesis was rejected because there was found to be a statistically significant correlation between these two factors. Here you'll see that the correlation coefficient for these two variables is 0.328, and this indicates a moderate linear correlation between teacher attitudes of the Common Core and teacher attitude toward the practicality of specifically pedagogical shift 3, balancing informational and literary texts. The next research question, the null hypothesis, was also rejected, and that is because there was found to be a statistically significant relationship between teacher attitudes of the Common Core and their scores on Part D of the teacher survey, which evaluated the teachers' attitudes of the school support when it comes to the implementation of Shift 3. Here you'll see that the correlation coefficient for these two variables is 0.259, and this does indicate, again, a moderate statistical linear correlation between these two variables. Finally, for research question 3, the null hypothesis again was rejected because there was found to be a statistical correlational relationship between teacher attitudes of the Common Core and their scores on Part E of the teacher survey. And this section of the survey evaluated their attitude toward this balance in comparison to the previous New York State standards. And here you'll see that the correlation coefficient for these two variables is 0.531, so a little bit higher for these two variables. And again, this is another moderate linear correlation between teacher attitudes of the Common Core and their feelings on this new balance in comparison to the previous set of New York State standards. Certain limitations restricted this study, and I'd like to go over those now. First, the sample size. We had a total of 397 teacher responses, and this does limit the overall outcome of the study. Also, the teachers were K-1-2 teachers in the state of New York, and all taught at public school districts. So this limited group of participants does limit the study a bit, and further research could be done by offering a more broad sample size. Also, as indicated before, it's difficult to separate teacher opinions of the Common Core with their feelings toward the implementation in general or specific factors related to the implementation, such as high-stakes testing or teacher evaluation processes. So providing this survey does not allow for the researcher to really differentiate between those two aspects. So sometimes what is actually being evaluated might be more than just their opinions of the Common Core, maybe factors unrelated to the standards themselves. So finding ways to evaluate teacher opinions specifically of the Common Core and then maybe specifically of other aspects of the implementation would be suggested for future research. The method of this survey distribution was through an online survey using Google Forms. And again, some teachers may not be comfortable with completing an online survey that may have limited the response rate. Also, some teachers may not be familiar with that format, an online format, and so that may have restricted the responses as well. The response rate itself, being 10%, is a bit of a limitation. I would like to see going forward future research in this area to find ways to increase that response rate to encourage more participation from a broader sample size. Teachers who participated in this study did score slightly above neutral on their attitudes toward the Common Core state standards. This was a mean score of 2.84. They also scored above neutral on the practicality of pedagogical shift 3, the school support with this implementation, and the balance of literary and informational text in comparison to the previous New York State standards. It's important to note that all of these fell above neutral, and so we're finding more positive teacher attitudes toward each of these areas. And given the limited research available that evaluated similar attitudes toward this standard initiative around the time of implementation, one may gather that teacher attitudes are shifting in a positive direction since the implementation. So that is relevant and important to consider when we look at this research and find ways to continue supporting the implementation and teacher needs. These attitudes should continue to be viewed as relevant and important and influential to districts across the state of New York and also districts outside of New York that are also implementing this instructional shift. The strongest correlation found during the study was that teachers who viewed a change in the amount of informational text exposure in elementary classrooms to be necessary had a more positive attitude toward the Common Core, where it was found that teachers who did not view this instructional shift as necessary had a more negative view of the Common Core. So given this data, it's just important that administrators and policymakers continue to communicate the why behind these instructional shifts, because as teachers realize the importance, the necessity of their change in instruction, we'll find that the implementation process is more successful. An overview of Section F is provided here. Again, Section F of the survey did provide open-ended questions. First, what has made the implementation positive was asked to teachers, and administrator support was found to be the strongest connection to positive implementation. Another question is what has made this implementation negative? And that's considered to be high stakes testing. And another concern is supporting the needs of diverse learners and having appropriate resources to effectively do that. Next, participants were asked, what does your classroom need to make this instructional shift a success? And overwhelmingly, teachers shared that they need more informational text. And this does align with research that is done by Duke to evaluate what is the current resources found in elementary classrooms and how those need to change in order for teachers to better implement this instructional shift. What training do you need in order to implement this shift was also asked, and 36 responses indicated a need for more training on how to support students with special needs. So as administrators consider what their continued implementation plan might look like in terms of professional development, that is certainly an area of concern for teachers and should be an area of support in professional development. Finally, what strategies are working? We asked this question to educators to see what they consider to be positive outcomes in terms of their instruction and how it's impacting students. Examples of these strategies included cooperative groups, returning to the text, close reading, and more opportunities for practice and mastery. Those are all positive shifts that are taking place in classrooms. After reviewing this data, it is evident that future research can and should be conducted, and we should continue evaluating teacher attitudes and relate that to the instructional shifts that are taking place in their classrooms. And that's relevant whether the Common Core stays in New York or a new instructional shift, a new standards-based initiative takes over. Future research in this area should seek to evaluate a larger, more diverse sample, so that could open it up to upper grade levels, including middle and high school. Also a more diverse sample, maybe stretching outside of the state of New York. Also, it's important to focus on the issues that hinder teachers from effectively implementing this shift. So we looked at some of these already, like a lack of resources, a need for more professional development and training, administration support. So evaluating those needs and finding what best practices work for teachers, what will best support them so that they feel equipped and ready to implement this instructional shift. Because the study provided a correlation between general teacher attitudes of the Common Core and their specific attitudes toward factors related to a specific pedagogical shift, it's understood that some teachers may have trouble isolating their feelings between these two specific areas. So future research could seek to pinpoint specific attitudes toward pedagogy behind the Common Core and the instructional shift, as opposed to evaluating the implementation or teacher evaluation processes or high stakes testing. So again, it's important to find ways to better differentiate these different factors when evaluating teachers, and possibly going outside of a survey-based model would assist a researcher in doing that. Finally, further research should be conducted to quantify the effectiveness that this instructional shift has had on achievement. So example and questions may include, how has the balance of literary and informational text impacted student vocabularies? How many minutes per day are students being exposed to informational text now in the Common Core state standards era? Is there a genuine balance between literary and informational text? Is that shift taking place? Is there fidelity in the classrooms? Longitudinally, how does the balance of literary and informational text in elementary classrooms impact student achievement at the high school level? How does it impact their career choices? All of these are excellent research questions that can be the basis for future research in this area. This research has not only exposed me to the importance and the influence of informational text on children in early childhood classrooms, but it's also inspired me to support teachers as they faithfully seek to implement this instructional shift with fidelity in their classrooms. Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to present my research, and I am glad to accept questions now.